I give a fuck? Why do I give a fuck? Why do I try so hard? Why do I care so much?
Welcome to Why Do I Give a Fuck? A cross-cultural conversation between myself, Deanne Tate,
and Johanna Thompson. In these times of great struggle and possible shift, we ask ourselves,
why do we give a fuck about any of it? How does the lens we see the world through impact what we see?
And what do we do about it?
Hello there. How you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you doing? Since I'm over here outside of U.S. territory and you're there, and it's going into the 100 days of Donald Trump's administration, and a lot of things are happening that I'm hearing, but I don't know what's really going on. So let me know what's going on.
Oh my gosh. I mean, it's 2 weeks, maybe. Has it been 2 weeks? It feels like it's been longer, and yet it feels like it was just yesterday.
Uh-oh.
It's a shit show as we expected it to be. None of it is surprising. Certainly, you and I have talked about all of the things that he has threatened throughout the course of his campaign to do, and he's doing them in short
Hmm.
order, and the list is long. But the thing that's really seems to be a focus for him these days, in the early days, is doing away with any kind of programming or departments or
Mm.
policies that support people in any way, shape, or form. It's like he I wouldn't be surprised if he has a team of people that are just researching all of the policies and departments and things that are in the federal government and saying, okay, give me a list and we're going to get rid of all of them. He did pardon all of the January 6th insurrection.
Mm.
Well, I say all. He pardoned most of them. He
Okay.
commuted some of the sentencing of the bigger guys, like the head
Okay.
of the Proud Boys, blanking on his name.
Mm.
He pardoned him his or commuted his sentence.
Okay.
So that he still technically, I guess, has the conviction on his record, but he commuted his
You don't have
sentence.
to do the time. He doesn't have to be
Out
accountable
of
for the
jail.
behavior,
He is
which
out
is
of
real,
jail.
real
And the first thing he
KKK-ish.
did was go to DC after he got released.
Super KKK-ish. Yeah.
The first thing he did was
Um,
go to DC after he got released. But most of the January Sixers have been pardoned, so their records have been expunged. And I was listening to an interview with one of the police officers, one of the Capitol police officers that was attacked and almost killed. Michael Fanone is his name. He's the one that was tased repeatedly and could hear them saying kill him with his own gun while and he got them to back off by screaming, I have kids, I have kids. That's how he kind of got their attention and got them to at least back off a little bit on what they were doing to him. Anyway, he reached out to the Department of Justice after the pardons had happened, and they informed him that he is no longer a victim because, and this is something I hadn't thought about when somebody gets pardoned from their crime, is that the victim
the
of
victimization
is
of
no
the
longer a
person
victim.
is not focused. Ooh,
Um,
that's why restorative justice makes so much more
yeah,
applicable sense for us getting to something
right,
different than what we're experiencing right now. But
right.
okay, so he's not a victim, which means that he can't place any type of
Nope.
complaint concern. He do civil suit though for the harm and the violence? I mean, we're not lawyers to
Good
be able to know
question.
like
I
a
don't
legal
know. I
jurisdiction.
don't know. I would have imagined maybe they've looked into that. I would think, and maybe not, and maybe now that they've been pardoned, because it wouldn't be. I don't think it would be considered double jeopardy to bring a civil lawsuit against anyone that particularly harmed him directly. So
Yeah.
that might be something they pursue because these folks did get convicted. So it may be that they didn't pursue civil because they got the criminal conviction. But I
Yep.
hadn't really thought about that before, that when the pardon happens, not only is the offender,
Yeah.
no longer have the record, which
Mm.
usually I'm happy about, it's like, it's so bizarre. It's like, that's one of the things that I find is happening in my own brain, is that it feels like that show Stranger Things, when they're in the upside down, it feels like that's what we're in because
Upside down. Ooh, being in the upside down
being in
under
the
the Trump
upside down, that's
administration.
in
Yeah,
that,
man.
if you've ever seen that show. But
A little bit. Yeah.
but when they, it's almost an not almost, it's an alternate universe to what's
Okay.
happening on the right side up. They never call it that,
Gotcha.
but when you're in the other dimension, they call it the
Yeah.
upside down because everything feels upside down, and
Upside
that's
down.
what it feels like now. And so things
Hmm.
like that, like I'm usually in favor of pardons because I don't believe in the carceral system and think everybody should be expunged on some level, but to give pardons to people I don't feel really, if I was to support the carceral system at all, would want them to stay in, and how that impacts the victim. And so I hadn't thought about that before, but now we're thinking about these things because they're coming into play. So
Yeah, victimization is shifting. I want to run it back though before
yeah.
thinking about that. Hearing you communicate that this is like Trump, what Trump is doing, I also want to offer in the thought process and suggestion that this is Project 2025, that he
Mm-hmm.
really is, helping to execute.
Mm-hmm.
So these plans were already in place to like reestablish white supremacy in the way that we experience it in the US.
Yeah.
And now Trump gets to be like the face and the executioner
Mm-hmm.
of all of these policies that
Mm-hmm.
they had already been having a strategy and a plan to
Right.
place. So
Right.
he's just a pawn in the playing. And the reason why I think that that's really important to bring up is because we don't want to get into the trap of just focusing it on being about Trump, because that's what we saw during the electoral
He's
process. And it's
taking
not
credit
about
for
Trump.
it. He's
He's
taking
taking
credit
credit
for it.
for it,
He's not
and that's
calling
what he's
it
going to
Project
do.
2025, but
He's
you're right. That's what it is.
He's a
Yeah.
charismatic leader. We know that in the United States, that is actually what people get excited about, somebody who has the personality to lead them and provide ideas and
Right.
all of the propaganda that humans, not just in the United States, but get pulled into.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't want folks to lose sight of Project 2025 plan and
Right.
with the face of Donald Trump being this chaotic leader that we don't know what we're going to get, because we do know what we're going to get if we actually are looking at the plan that was laid out. So
Yeah.
for folks to not be confused about that. But what else is going on? So we know that he's firing folks from federal government. Well, he's executing what Project 2025 did. They're going to shut it down. They're going to eliminate all of these GS titles within the departments.
Well, he's doing away with some entire departments. This morning, the conversation is about him wanting to dismantle the USAID. So that is apparently the next department on the chopping block.
As soon as you say that, I'm thinking about the United States war with China. So I want to say war. I don't want to use that language. So let me run that back to
Okay.
competition with
Yeah.
China,
Mm-hmm.
because we're not at war.
Right.
The competition with China and what that's going to look like, because China has been really masterful in coming in, so providing soft power and support and infrastructure with like this kind of debt relationship with
Mm-hmm.
countries. That's one of the things. China is very present here in Jamaica. And so what is that going to look like for US positioning? It's going to really place us in a position of aggression, like really strong, heavy aggression, because we are not promulgating all of the relationships that we need to across the globe to
Mm-hmm.
make sure that we have friends and less enemies, which is a really interesting
Yeah.
position to take on a global scale. And then to put place tariffs. You were telling me something about tariffs are also what go on with that.
As of yesterday, the tariffs against Mexico and Canada and China, I think, is also in that mix. But I've been hearing more about Mexico and China. I mean, Mexico and Canada, maybe because of the
Okay.
proximity to our borders. So those went into effect yesterday, officially. But then today, apparently, Trump had a very, as he described it, a very lovely conversation with somebody in the Mexican government. And so he's decided to put a stay on the tariffs against Mexico for 30
Mm,
days while they negotiate.
okay.
So I'm sure that just means somebody's kissing his ass. And
Absolutely.
yeah,
100%.
and trying to get, get him to not lower the boom. I haven't heard anything from Canada, so I'm assuming that they are going to hold their ground. But yeah, the markets are, of course, are reacting, and there's a lot of chatter about the fact that he makes it sound like this is all about, well, these countries owe us money, And
Mm,
there have been all these years that we've had deficits from them because we don't get them to pay us. So these
mm.
tariffs are going to be a way of fixing that. So he makes it sound like it's going to be all this flood of money coming into the US that should have been there all along and hasn't been because nobody was, enforcing.
Collecting. Yeah.
Right. But it really, I mean, it's astounding to think about how it's going to impact just the regular,
Mm.
degular folks throughout the United States and in terms of the cost of everything going up. And, and that coupled with the immigration issues, mass deportations have already started. ICE
Rating.
has been raiding in a lot of different places. They've been going to churches, they've been going to schools.
Mm.
About an ICE raid in Chicago where ICE came to supposedly ICE. This is the weird part. They came to a school in an elementary, no, a high school in Chicago and demanded to be let in, and the principal and the school heads refused them entry because they didn't have
Of
a warrant.
course.
Supposed to have a warrant and they didn't. And then later
And you
on,
should not be doing this business. To cut you off, I did.
no, please cut me off.
You should not be doing this business on educational,
No,
you know, property,
no,
school grounds, and with young people.
with
Like,
children. No.
because then you can't, how do you create an educational environment that allows young people to feel safe going to schools? And then there's going to be tons of people who don't want to send their young people to schools
Right,
with the
right.
threat of
Or
ICE coming and raiding and ripping families apart
yeah, and we've
while
already
they're
had
at
reports of
educational
children
institutions.
going, children being left at school because their parents have been scooped
Hmm.
up, and so
Mm.
children
And then placed into the system. And then we know when young people get put into the foster or dependency care system in the
they
United
get
States,
home
they're
and there's
completely
nobody there,
lost, or
and
they
the children are
absolutely.
on their own. Yeah, that's been happening. But it was interesting for the particular raid that happened in Chicago. The Some of the news folks, reached out to ICE to try to get a comment or whatever. And ICE was saying it wasn't us. It wasn't us.
Hmm.
So there's this
So
whole,
that means people are being imposters going into
well,
schools. Is that what the
either
implication of that?
ICE is just not, they're just lying because they want to and feel like they can, or there are vigilante, folks out there that are dressing up as ICE, which I do think I'm pretty sure I've heard reports of people doing that where citizens are arming themselves. It's the new thing for the militias to do, the people that want to be able to operate in a militia run and militia driven society, just arming themselves and going in and saying, we're ICE and we're going to take you in. So but
The
that,
impact of this, and like, if we're talking about like US culture, the fabric of like the family
mhm,
and historical tactics of really creating like chaos to be able to implement systems of control, this
mhm,
is like a blueprint
yeah,
for that. Because for people who don't people outside of the United States will understand this, because folks have tried to come and visit the United States. So like
mhm,
the the implications of the impact on that, on like the collective community structure, is really very, very strong, because families being ripped apart causes all kinds of chaos. We see families being ripped apart within our systems, with as far as the criminal legal system goes,
right,
and the impact of that. But now, since they are extrapolating it beyond the criminal legal system, it's like, how are we going to, I don't know if people are paying, I mean, people are paying attention, because now the impact of it is actually happening. So
yeah, yeah.
it's
Well,
just,
some people are paying attention. There's still obliviousness abundant. Some of that is shutdown, this shock and awe. I've been hearing experts talking about, that this shock and awe, this first 2 weeks, has it really been 2 weeks? Because it feels like it's been forever, kind of cascade of issues and things happening. is intentional to shut down that awareness, to drive people into the whole I can't
Can't do it anymore. I'm not going to pay
uh,
attention and not going to
yeah, I'm
engage.
just
And
going to shut
so they
down
can just
because
go
I don't
forward
know
with
what to
their
do with it.
policies.
Yeah.
Mm,
So
hmm.
that's happening still too, but I'm also seeing people, at least in the social media fabric, some of my friends who have not said a word about Palestine for over 15 months or anything that's happening in the Congo or Sudan or any of these places are now like vocal and asking people to, call their senators and everything because it's at their doorstep. And it's like, where you been? We've
Mm,
been screaming at the top of our lungs that this was all coming. And, I guess better late than never. I suppose shaming people is not helpful, but
never.
it's
That's never
frustrating.
helpful.
But it's frustrating, to all of a sudden have people going, oh my goodness. And it's like, it's been, oh my goodness, for quite some time. So,
The delayed response of all marginalized people
yeah.
watching people go, oh my goodness.
Oh my goodness.
It's a real thing.
The white people are
Um,
going, oh my goodness. Yeah, yeah,
Of course,
yeah,
100%. Well, I mean, I think that people also who mistakenly decided for this administration are
yeah.
recognizing the impacts to their extended families or relationships, or if there's somebody at a school who sees that folks are trying to like bombard their way in to do ICE raids, it's a different impact. I remember, I don't know, we spoke about this a little bit, but there was a woman that I met when I was in Kingston who worked for the federal government in the medical department. And I remember she was so adamant and excited about like this transition in the administration. And I was like, aren't you worried about your job?
Yeah.
Like, are you paying attention to exactly what they said they were going to do? And I didn't get her contact information, but I know people who know her, but I would love to have a conversation with that person right now to see how she feels about the threat of the loss of her entire department being
Well,
completely shut down.
last
Yeah,
week he paused EBT and WIC. He stopped.
really.
Yeah, shut those down. I don't know if they got reinstated because I don't
Yeah.
I think there were some lawsuits that were coming or something, but
He said I think that that was something that you can't do. That would cause major chaos
the
because then you would
videos that
have
were popping up.
so many people without food. You can't do
Yeah.
that in the
The
United States.
videos
You
that were
can't do
popping
that. That's
up
not gonna.
of white
Mm-mm.
people, Trump supporters, who were now crying because they couldn't get access to their
Their
food.
EBT or
That's
their
what made me
access to
think of when
anything.
you were saying that. It's like this shit is going to impact you. Project
Yeah.
2025 is not just going to impact marginalized people. And, but as classic whiteness, we have to get hit upside the head with a 2x4 before we realize, that we're just as vulnerable as anybody else. So,
Oh, I was watching something else where it's like, one of the things as you're scrolling, and it was just like, a white person when something goes wrong, like they immediately go to like straight violence, like straight like
yeah.
aggression and violence,
Oh,
and
yeah. Because
I'm
we
gonna
have no skill set.
be done.
We
No
have
skill set.
no skill
That's true.
set for dealing with
Yeah,
this. None. When people start to take away our access and rights, we don't know how to handle it. We are clueless. There are no tools in our toolbox for dealing with this.
yeah.
So yeah,
Well,
violence is
that's the tools in the toolbox, but I'm not sure how we're gonna be able to access them with like lack of DEI now that that's
yeah.
being one of the targeted things. And I know
Mhm.
that we'll have a whole conversation because I'm hearing that there was a collision in the sky by airplanes near DC, Philly. Where was in
DC.
that proximity?
An airline, a passenger airline, and a Black Hawk Army helicopter
Hmm.
outside of Reagan.
Yeah, and
There
then
also was a crash in Philly. Or you've heard the two stories, but they were two different things. There was a
okay.
medevac flight helicopter
Mm,
that went down in Philly and killed everybody that was on board, the patient and the family and the
mm,
doctors and nurses that were traveling with them, and then injured, I think killed one person on the ground and injured because it landed in a neighborhood and injured quite a few other people. So yeah, we got planes, we got things dropping out of the air, but the collision that happened at Reagan was horribly, horribly, horribly tragic. I mean, all crashes are tragic, I found out because a friend of mine that I knew long ago when my daughter was young, because they lived down the road from us. We used to carpool their kids, and my child
Hmm.
would carpool to school. And there in the skating world, the mom is a coach and former ice skater, and her two girls ice skate. And they were just in Wichita at the national championship, and there were quite a few, I don't know what the number is, of these young skaters, their parents and their coaches that were on the airline. They were returning home from this nationals training. So yeah, it was either a training or a competition. So it's never,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
I mean, and that's the thing, like, right, the impact of life just happening, and then like the impact of policies that are causing life to just do what life is doing, and then how leadership is dealing with that is some of the things that I'm having like a concern and curiosity about, because, and I want to talk further about this, but when we are looking at a tragedy that happens to that leadership that should come in and then using that as a platform to continue to dog whistle and marginalize
yeah,
communities, pulling in and targeting DEI, which has actually been really expansive in both our educational and our professional settings, and just helping us to actually have higher, like get to places of more expanded evolution,
mm,
because we have a larger collective of inclusive minds and thoughts to be generated. It is it's to be expected with the Trump administration, right? That we're moving
right.
back into a very limited and narrow focus, purposeful intention on
Hegemonic.
how to,
Yeah.
yeah, hegemonic, based in white supremacy that we're heading back into, right? Because there's this fear of the fact that white supremacy has been targeted as being harmful, as it should have been, and then what the backlash to that targeting has been. So
Yeah,
here
you're
we
referring
are.
to I think you're referring to the when Trump had because typically the president, when a tragedy happens like this, the president
Yes.
would go to the site of the tragedy and try to console some of the family members of those lost. And he was asked at a press conference whether or not he was going to go to the site. And his response was, "What, you mean the ocean? You want me to go swimming? That's a stupid question." And then his reference to the fact that there was a DEI, that DEI was to be blamed for the
Hmm.
crash. And I think what he meant was he was referring to the air traffic controllers, possibly, or maybe he was referring to the pilots. We're still, the information is still, the investigation is still in its early stages, and I haven't heard any definitive answers as to why the crash happened. I've heard of some different issues with the Black Hawk and with those kinds of things, but yeah. So he's taking DEI and he's using that as a conflated reason that anybody is incompetent in their job, and
Hmm.
yet Hegseth just got confirmed as Secretary of Defense with absolutely no credentials or any kind of skill set to run that size of a
Hmm.
department. And maybe he'll collapse it, which I wouldn't be mad at. But
Hmm.
it's so interesting how that disconnect that we've talked about before, about how you're doing the thing that you're accusing other people of doing, and yet, be oblivious to
Yeah.
that. So,
But there's this interesting opportunity to juxtapose DEI with paternalism that exists in white supremacy, right? So, you know
yeah.
what I mean? So, yeah, we should definitely talk about that, because
Yeah.
it really is kind of the same utilization of making sure that those who are around you are being the producers of the work and the outcomes.
Hmm.
But it's a similar concept that is accepted within white communities, right? Paternalism, your son runs your son or daughter runs the company that you built, whatever the case may be,
Oh,
and they have friends
nepotism.
from
You talk about
school.
nepotism or
Nepotism.
oh,
Well, more nepotism. Yeah, yeah, that's
yeah.
probably the more appropriate. And the paternalistic component of the entire Trump administration, though,
Oh, yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
saying that we're returning back to this time when father knows best. And that
Right.
is the paternalistic component of like
Right.
how we're setting up our structures and living and holding our lives. And so
Yeah.
that, and then nepotism being the stronger word for what happens in comparison to DEI. So that's what we need to
Right.
have a
Yeah,
conversation
when
about.
people
So
get
thank
put
you for
into
course
positions
correcting
that they
that.
have absolutely no skill set for, only
No
because
skill
they
set
know
for it just
something,
because based
or
on
they,
relationship.
I mean, Hegseth is now running the
Yeah.
largest department in our government. I'm not
Yeah.
saying I agree with it being the largest department, but it is. And his skill set is he was in the military for a hot minute, and and he was a Fox News anchor, and
Hmm.
those were his skill sets. So yeah, but
Well, this gives us the opportunity to look at, to determine how people, the reality of how people decide who is going to be working alongside them, right?
well,
In whatever project.
yeah, and
Because
we could look back at the history of the people that we elect to office, at the state, federal,
Mhm,
and local level. How are some of these people even in the Senate that they would be able to confirm Hegseth,
mhm,
so it's not just the people that he's nominating and appointing. It's also the people that we elect because they are incompetent. So many of them are incompetent to be in that position of power, and yet they get there
mhm.
anyway, and they stay there. Yeah.
And I'm trying to that, and that's what I was thinking about, like federal employees. It's hard to like get rid of them because of the systems that we have existing. So like how this is happening and the way that it's happening is really peculiar to me. It really speaks into the rules will always be positioned with those in power to
Yes.
change as
Yes.
those in power will them to.
Yes.
And that is why we need to look at what power balancing and or shifting looks like
Yes.
today,
Yes.
because we are definitely seeing what the impacts, and that's going to be continuous
Mm-hmm.
as they roll out. So
Lots
I
to
want
do.
to have a deeper dive. I definitely want to have this conversation about what the dog whistle of DEI, and then also
Yeah.
every opportunity that this platform uses to like dog whistle and marginalize and separate folks, taking the T and the Q out of the LGBTQ
Yes.
um,
That happened.
acronym.
Yeah.
That like
It basically
as soon as
erasing trans and non-binary and queer folks, just erasing
just
their ability,
you,
firing
yeah.
all active military that are serving openly trans. They're all gone. That happened the end of last week. He fired all of them, so they got kicked
And
out of.
there are U.S. citizens that have these community of peoples as their family members, as their, you know what I'm saying? Like
Yes.
as their community members. And then where is the support network for those people,
Right.
right? Where is the burden of responsibility and accountability for human humanity going to, who's
Right.
going to take up those torches if people don't have to do it do it themselves within their own communities?
Right.
I'm at a loss for words because the impact is so large, and it almost feels like you're swimming in like an abyss of ridiculous chaos that you don't even know where to begin
Like a
to
big
start working.
whirlpool. It's like a big
Yeah, ma'am.
whirlpool, and it feels like it's
Uh,
just pulling, all of us
yeah.
into it. Yeah.
And then just trying to stay away from that is stay away from the impacts of that is really going to be the challenge, or figure out ways to be able to cope through it in a healthy way is really going to be what's important for us to do. So
Yeah.
giving a fuck is part of
We need to keep giving a fuck. That's for sure.
that. Yeah.
Why do I give a fuck? Why do
Thanks
I
for
give
joining
a
us.
fuck?
Until next time,
Why
as you
do I
move
try
throughout
so
your day,
hard? Why am I
continue to
so
ask yourself,
attached? Why do I give a fuck?
Why Do I Give a Fuck is produced in collaboration with Johanna and Diane. Music by Norwegian musician Water. See you next time.
Why do I